Welcome back. Just before the break, we were talking about democracy in Bangladesh and democracy in general. We just moved to slightly a different topic of leadership. Leadership comes usually from educated, usually urban, educated elite. That's what we have been observing in Southeast Asia particularly. But in Bangladesh for many years, the students' union that we used to see and that used to throw up able leaders that would become one day the national leaders, that is missing. That system of students' unions at universities and colleges is not there. We have Bangladesh Chhatro League, see, but some of those students are not students, see. They are not at colleges or universities, they are students by profession and not by vocation.
Yes, which again leads me back to the past. Talking of the Chhatro League, Bangabandhu was the person who founded the Chhatro League. A gentleman like Mr. Tajuddin Ahmed, very politically conscious. He used to keep diaries, regular diaries, and all the other leaders. If you look at other politicians before Bangabandhu's time, Shere Bangla. Now, they were men of commitment, people of commitment. And what they did was, you talked about the politicians coming from urban classes, but our politicians, Shere Bangla, Fazlullah, Bangabandhu, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, people like them, they came from a rural base,
yes,
and they traveled. And their greatest quality was that they were able to mingle with the people.
yes.
They used to travel down to walk, not just travel, by traveling, they used to walk to villages. And in my young days, when I was a student, I've seen, I've had personal experience of Bangabandhu actually remembering faces of simple peasants whose parents he had met 30 years previously. Then the Indian journalist Nikhil Chakraborty, he also told me about his remembrance of things past. Now, about today, these days, we haven't had any elections for Daksu. You're right, because the students of Dhaka University especially, and of course of other universities in Bangladesh, they played a very major and historic role in the creation of Bangladesh, of course. For example, say if you could, in 1969, you remember the mass upsurge against the Ayub regime. That was basically led by students. Bangabandhu was in jail. And
the language movement.
The language, of course. You see, actually, the students in Bangladesh's history, the most pivotal roles were played by Bangladeshi students all the way from 1952 up to 1971. And then again, yes, of course, in the movement against General Ershad, students were involved. Yes. But then there was a system, there was a process. There were elections to students' unions, Daksu, for example. And we have had good leaders like Tufail Ahmed, we have Razaul Haq Chaudhry Mushtaq, we have Ubaidul Qadir, and so many others. See, you know them as well as I do. But over the last so many years, we haven't had these Daksu elections. And what we have had in place is that a very partisan attitude to student politics. You have the Chhatro League on the one side, Chhatro Dal on the other side. There used to be a very vibrant Chhatro Union, which in the 1960s was very respected because people thought that the followers, the members of the Chhatro Union, say the difference between the Chhatro Union and the Chhatro League was the Chhatro Union was more into an intellectual side of political arguments, and the Chhatro League was more into action-oriented movements. So, but that thing has somehow gone missing. So if our student unions are not activated, if regular elections are not held at these student unions, different Daksu and Chaksu, and so many other student unions at these different universities, I think we are in for a bit of trouble. Because by trouble I mean you're not letting these the leadership grow, because leadership is a process. You cannot impose leaders from the top.
Yeah, this ties up with what you mentioned earlier. This political awareness. See. Yeah. The political awareness is not something that you can buy off the shelves of a supermarket, you see. It has to be nurtured
Absolutely.
inculcated.
Absolutely.
And that will come from the universities and colleges, you see. And if this is missing, then the effect is that we won't get proper leaders, see.
You get a vacuum.
And that is where we started from, you see, democracy.
Yes.
You can't have democracy without proper leaders, proper awareness, you see. Having elections at regular intervals is not the democratic criteria, see. It is one of the. What happens at the elections? Now, this modern conception of having, instead of physically casting the vote and counting the vote, now we have electronic voting machines.
EVMs, yes.
And which was very recently demonstrated in Delhi Parliament,
right,
that it can be easily doctored. And I'm afraid that it is rumored that in Bangladesh elections, upcoming elections, EVMs are going to be used at, if not in every place, at some of these selected polling centers, you see. And that can cause a bit of concern among the parties.
Yes, I think it is, in the case of EVMs, the Election Commission especially has to be very careful, and at the same time has to be assertive. So play an assertive role on whether they can be used wherever it seems it thinks they should be used. But given the example of the Indian Parliament, as we know about it, I think care should be taken about the use of EVMs, because votes, say, should not be votes will be cast, but then they should not be manipulated. And as for the larger question of democracy, I think you cannot have a country cannot have democracy unless it sees a growth of leadership, which leadership again believes in democratic norms, the spirit of tolerance, respecting the other person's point of view. That has gone missing. I think the element of partisanship that we have in Bangladesh today is very worrying, because we see a divided country politically, and the task of national leadership now we have so many very good leaders in the country, in the ruling party, outside the ruling party, then politicians who have effectively retired. So they should serve. They should be examples for us, and they should also take the lead to promote the ideas of democracy. By democracy, you and I, obviously, we don't mean just casting our vote on election day and then democracy comes to us. Democracy means, again, my right to economic emancipation, my right to speak my mind freely, my right to dissent with the government or with anybody else. So, and the question of debate, for example.
Safety of my going out and coming back.
Exactly. So, the rule of law, for example, particularly. So, and by democracy, I also mean the kind of democracy that we have in other countries, in any democratic country, academic, healthy debate over the issues, which debate we have seen missing in our country, in Bangladesh's parliament. We thought that this kind of debate would again resume after the fall of General Ershad, when the elections of February 1991 took place.
Do you think that media has a role to play here?
Media, of course, has a role to play, definitely, but the media has got to be very careful that it is objective. It must not give any idea of partisanship. Of course, personally, I agree with one political party. I agree with politicians who believe in secularism and secular democracy and the spirit of 1971. But at the same time, as a newsman, as a journalist, when I report, when I write, say, I should be able, I should have that sense in me, and so should other journalists have the sense in them to see to it that their journalism is not regarded as partisan, that they're not identified with any political party. The moment a journalist is identified with a political party, I think he or she becomes tainted, and he becomes damaged goods. So that should not happen, but then unfortunately that has been happening. So as we can see all around us, because say you have journalists who support one political party and journalists who support another political party. why should journalists do that? Say,
It's not their job to support or
no,
oppose.
I mean they're support. Because I think I may, if I may cite one example. The famous American journalist Walter Lippmann in the 1960s. He was a very vocal defender of the Vietnam War during President Johnson's time, and he used to write articles in the Washington Post supporting the American government's Vietnam policy. Then he went to Vietnam, Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City, to study the situation. He saw that things were different, vastly different from what he had been writing about. He came back and wrote an article, the gist of which was, say, we are not winning the war. And President Johnson, he read that article, the first thing, and that is one good quality about democratic leaders. Every morning they should read the newspapers. Johnson read that article, and then his comment was, if Lippmann says we are not winning the war, then we are not winning the war. So you see, that should be, a journalist should be able to write in such a way that he or she will compel political leaders to read what is there. But then at the same time, political leaders should also be ready to read what is written, to accept, to look at, to observe what has been, to judge what has been written with wisdom, instead of getting angry and then giving the impression that this journalist does not know anything. So unfortunately, in third world countries, we have had this feeling all the way in different countries. Politicians know everything, according to them, and journalists know nothing.
Well, Mr. Badrul Ahsan, we don't get journalists of your caliber every day. So there are a lot of ideas in my mind, and I would like to change the topic. And as we were discussing before the show, the new book, or rather the book about that is making news all over the world, the book by retired Chief Justice or former Chief Justice R.K. Sinha. Have you had the time or the pleasure to read through or read
well,
parts of it?
I'm onto it. I've been reading it and trying to make a fast reading of it. Because naturally,
I think the name is Broken Dream.
A broken dream.
A broken dream.
So,
what is this dream about?
Well, he actually, as I understand it, as I've understood it so far, he talks. His dream is basically related to rule of law, the question of justice, the independence of the judiciary, and he feels in his book, as far as I can make out, that in the last 1 year, owing to everything that has been happening around him, and around his
with him and
around him and around the 16th the judgment on the 16th Amendment that he delivered, he feels that rule of law, the concept of rule of law has been broken, has been violated, and he thinks that what he tried to do was to establish the independence of the judiciary, in his opinion, and that has not happened. So, which is why his sadness, his anger, his irritation, all these things come out in his work. So that is my feeling. So, and of course, we've all been reading excerpts from it on social media. So it's very, very. Well, people have criticized him for writing it, and then again, some others have also praised him for writing it. That's only natural. But then, personally, I would say the way he had to leave was very unfortunate. It should not have happened that way, because a Chief Justice is, after all, the chief of one of the three branches of the state.
In one line, could you say, was that democratic, his departure?
No, that was anything but democracy. That was less than democracy, and I think he should not have been treated that way. Because if you look at it, look at the incidents which happened before. We had one minister, the law minister, telling the media that he was ill, and then on the day he leaves, he comes out of his house at the gate. He tells newsmen that he had never been ill. Now in the book, he says the minister said, "I had cancer. I never had cancer." So, I mean, these things should not have been.
Well, Mr. Badrul Ahsan, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you.
My pleasure too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us, viewers. I hope that you've enjoyed the show as much as we have. Such an informative person, such a learned person. We don't have persons like him every day. We hope that you've enjoyed the show as much as we have in producing you and bringing it to you. Next time, next week. See you again. In the meantime, take care.